COVID-19 Vaccine Damage Bill, second reading.
Al?
Sir Christopher Chope.
I start off with the proposition that those of us who have been double jabbed with vaccine against COVID-19 must count our blessings if we've not suffered any adverse consequences, and I am happy to include myself within that category. This bill is about all those who have suffered injury or even death as a result of enlisting in the war against COVID by being vaccinated. The numbers affected are relatively low, which is all the more reason why the government should not be playing hard to get in relation to the compensation scheme for those who do suffer adverse consequences as a result of having done the right thing. The government has produced quite a lot of information about the amount of vaccine, the extent of vaccine damage, and some of that is set out in the documents which the government produces in relation to those who have applied for compensation or have notified under the yellow card scheme. And essentially what the yellow card scheme shows in the most recent report, which came out I think on the 9th of September and covers the period from the 9th of December up until the 1st of September, it shows that there have been 435 reports of major blood clots and low platelet counts, including 74 deaths. It shows that there have been 767 cases of inflammation of the heart, a condition which is almost unheard of in medicine on a normal day-to-day basis. It shows that there have been some 35,000 reports of menstrual disorder, and there are all sorts of other effects which are set out in the comprehensive report. But it also, I think very worryingly, says that there are 1,632 reports of deaths having taken place shortly after vaccination. And I think if we're trying to build vaccine confidence, we need to actually ensure that we're open with the public about the facts. And that's why I was very disappointed when I asked the Secretary of State on the 7th of July what information his department holds on the number of deaths that have been reported of people who have died within 1 month, 2 months and 3 months of having received a COVID-19 vaccination since the 1st of January. And yes, but perhaps it'd be more convenient if I actually read out the answer that we received from the Minister. And he said, data on the number of deaths reported of people who have died within 1, 2 and 3 months of having received the COVID-19 vaccination since the 1st of January is not available in the format requested. Public Health England monitors the number of people who have been admitted to hospital and died from COVID-19 who have received 1 or 2 doses of the vaccine and will publish this data in due course. That data has not yet been published. And I think it's very important that we are able to put this issue into context, because there's a lot more damage being done to our citizens as a result of COVID-19 vaccinations than in any other vaccination programme in history.
Right, honourable friend, give way. Just on, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Just looking at the government website here, it's the government did a press release on the 3rd of December last year saying that COVID-19 was going to be added to the vaccine damage payment scheme. Are you saying that it hasn't been yet, or that it has been?
I am saying that it has been added. It was added to the scheme, but from all intents and purposes, it seems to have just been a gesture, because in the substance of it, people have now started applying under the Act for compensation, and none of those cases have been dealt with. No decisions have been made in any of those cases, and worryingly, there's now a government response to a petition which really reflects what's in my bill, because what it calls for is reform of the 1979 Act to improve support for those who've been harmed by COVID-19 vaccines. You may remember, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Pearson Commission found that those injured as a result of vaccination should have access to financial support, and that was the background to the 1979 Act. But that Act makes provision of a maximum payment of £120,000, together with a threshold of 60% disablement. And as a result, fewer than 2% of applications are successful. That's why I think, and that's what this bill calls for, it calls for the government to carry out an inquiry, set up a judge-led inquiry into the issues which are raised, because reforming the Vaccine Damage Payments Act would increase vaccine confidence and would provide urgent support for those who have been injured or bereaved through the vaccination against COVID-19. So what did the Minister say when he responded? What the response dated the 5th of August says is, the government has a robust system to monitor potential side effects of the COVID-19 vaccine and has added the vaccine to the VDPS. We will consider further action as more evidence becomes available. And then it goes on to tell us what we already know about the 1979 Act. And then it says, whilst understanding the desire and need to move forward rapidly with processing these claims, it is important to have an established evidence base around causational links between the vaccine and potential side effects. Not doing so risks claims being declined in error based on a lack of evidence, disadvantaging applicants. But of course, we've already got a lot of evidence that people have suffered damage or if not death as a result of these vaccinations. And there was recently a coroner's report of somebody, I think in the north of England, who had definitely, the coroner's verdict was that that person had died as a direct result of receiving the COVID-19 vaccine.
He calls for a judge-led inquiry. I quite understand the importance of the issue, but there are many in the country who believe there should be a judge-led inquiry into many aspects of what's happened on COVID. And there will be many who will wonder why this should be preferenced over other issues. I wonder if he could give his thoughts as how he would explain to care workers in care homes, for instance, why their concerns should not be considered at the same time as these important concerns.
Well, as far as on the point about care workers in care homes, and the requirement that this House has now made that they should all be vaccinated, even if they have got a genuine desire not to be vaccinated for reasons because they may be fearful of the consequences. Although these consequences only flow in a minority of cases, it surely should be the judgment of each individual as to whether or not they are going to take the risk of having a vaccination or whether they're not going to take a risk of having a vaccination. And obviously we know that even if people are vaccinated, it doesn't mean that they are immune from COVID-19, and it certainly doesn't mean that they are incapable of transmitting COVID-19 to somebody else. So those are all issues which need to be weighed up. But going back to the Honourable Gentleman's challenge, which is basically, he seems to be suggesting that these hapless families, probably 10,000 of them, maybe more than that, who have suffered real serious damage as a result of doing the right thing, that those people should be left hanging around for years wondering whether or not they're going to be eligible for any compensation. I think that that is totally the wrong message. The message the government should be saying is that if you do the right thing, you will be looked after by the government if something goes wrong.
I just wanted to ask, I've been listening really intently to what he has to say. I'm just conscious, in terms of the narrative here, how do we ensure that, yes, on the one hand, people who do suffer severe disablement as a result of vaccines get that support and payment, but on the other hand, we do not create a culture of hesitancy where people don't uptake vaccines, or equally don't produce vaccines. There's a fear of being cast that these things might cause mass severe side effects. I'm just conscious to hear his views on that.
Well, I'm trying to address that point, because obviously you can't ignore the fact that there is a fear out there about vaccination. And it's not, in a sense, you can't suppress reports of coroners saying somebody's died as a result of having a vaccination. You can't suppress reports. I know from my own personal knowledge of people who have suffered people in really good health, and then they had their first vaccine. And I know of one person in particular who then had a stroke and was in hospital for some time of that, and then had severe heart problems, and even had to be referred to Harefield Hospital. Now, those are not just anecdotes, those are facts which are known across the country by people. The government may have not been too keen to promote that information, but I think in failing to do that, it is actually counterproductive. Those facts are out there, we know that. I think most important of all, to give some assurance to those people who are already suffering. Our hospitals have got a large number of inpatients who are only there because those patients took the vaccine. And it's causing a lot of angst for consultants across the country.
I wonder if the honourable gentleman would agree that his bill would not be required if his own government agreed a date for an investigation into the government's handling of the pandemic, just as the government in Scotland has agreed to.
Well, I disagree with that, because how long does he think that the inquiry into the handling of the pandemic is going to take? I would suspect it to take about 2, 3, 4 years. Now, what I'm talking about is people who are suffering in hospital or at home now because they did the right thing in getting themselves vaccinated and have had adverse reactions as a result. So it may be, he thinks it's a clever political point to talk about the delay in starting a mammoth public inquiry into this. This doesn't need a public inquiry into the causes of COVID. This needs a judge-led inquiry into how we should best and most fairly compensate those who have suffered adverse consequences of doing the right thing. Of course I would do that.
I thank him for giving way. This independent review that he wants to have actioned, and the timescale that he's talked about, does he not agree with me that over that period of time, the evidence that we need to actually ascertain the vaccine damage will probably be found, and those payments will be made?
Well, I don't agree with that, because there's no evidence yet that the government's really getting to grips with this. And as I've said, referring to the yellow reporting card system, we know that there is causation between vaccinations and damage caused by those vaccines. Yet the government, in a lot of its literature, seems to be denying that. Now, if we can establish that there is, as a result of people being vaccinated, some are suffering adverse consequences, severe injury or even death. If we can agree on that, then the issues around causation are probably secondary, because I think that in those circumstances the best solution would be to provide a no-fault compensation scheme. So you don't have to prove a fault and you automatically qualify for compensation. And indeed, that is the condition, ironically, that is the condition to which the government has signed up in going for the COVAX scheme internationally. Because under the WHO COVAX scheme, the government has to agree, and is indeed paying into the COVAX scheme, to indemnify any claims made for vaccine damage arising from the deployment of those vaccines. So if it's good enough for the third world and the COVAX scheme, why aren't we doing something similar in our own country for our own people?